My name is Carol. I'm 60 years old, and what I'm about to tell you will forever change the way you see your own family. 3 days ago, my own son Julian and my daughter-in-law Lauren pushed me and my husband Arthur off a cliff over 100 feet high. As I lay down there, my body broken and blood running down my face, I heard my husband's desperate whisper, "Carol, don't move. Play dead." But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when Arthur revealed the most terrible truth a mother can hear, a secret our children had kept for 25 years. For 4 decades, Arthur and I built what we believed was a perfect family. We woke up every morning in our small house in the suburbs, where the smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the birdsong. I worked as a teacher at the local elementary school, and every afternoon I came home with stories about my little students. Arthur had his woodworking shop, where he created the most beautiful furniture you've ever seen. His hands, rough but delicate, could transform a simple piece of wood into a work of art. We had 2 sons, Michael, our firstborn, and Julian, 5 years younger. Michael was the soul of the house, always laughing, always helping his father in the shop, always protecting me from any worry. Julian was different, more reserved, but I loved him with the same intensity. As a mother, you never make distinctions, or at least that's what I believed then. On Sundays, after church, the whole family would gather at our oak table that Arthur had carved with his own hands. Michael would tell us about his plans to study engineering, while Julian remained silent, playing with the food on his plate. Life was simple but beautiful. In the evenings, Arthur and I would walk the path that circled our town, talking about our dreams, about how we'd watch our grandchildren grow, about how we'd grow old together in that same house. I never imagined those walks would be my training for the hike that nearly killed me. On weekends, I organized family get-togethers where my sisters Barbara and Nancy would come with their husbands and children. The house would fill with laughter, with kids running everywhere, with women sharing recipes in the kitchen while the men fixed some problem in the yard. Arthur was my perfect partner. After 40 years of marriage, he still brought me wildflowers he picked on his way to work. He helped me grade my students' papers, and I would hold the wooden pieces for him while he cut them in his shop. We were a team, an unbreakable unit. Oh, that's what I thought. At night, we'd sit on the porch swing watching the stars, planning our future. We talked about traveling when we retired, about seeing the ocean we'd never seen, about building a smaller house when our sons started their own families. But perfect happiness, as I would discover years later, often hides the deepest tragedies. When Michael turned 20, something changed in our family. He started having arguments with Julian about things I didn't understand. I'd hear them whispering in the hallway, and when I appeared, they would fall silent. Arthur told me it was just brotherly stuff, that they'd get over it. I wanted to believe him because I needed to believe my family was still perfect. One October night, exactly 25 years ago, Michael didn't come home for dinner. We waited until 11, until midnight, until 1 in the morning. Julian was in his room, supposedly studying, but I noticed something strange in his eyes when I asked about his brother. Arthur went out to look for him with the neighbors. They checked every corner of the town, every path, every place Michael used to go. At dawn, they found his body at the bottom of the river ravine. The police said it was an accident, that he had probably slipped in the dark. I never questioned that version because I couldn't imagine the truth being so much more horrible. Michael's funeral was the darkest day of my life. I wore my only black dress, the same one I had worn to my mother's burial. Julian was strangely calm for someone who had just lost his older brother. While I cried until I ran out of tears, he remained silent, with an expression that now, after what I know, sends shivers down my spine. Arthur didn't leave my side all day, holding me up when my legs couldn't anymore, whispering words of comfort that I now know tasted bitter in his mouth. After Michael's death, Julian changed completely. He became more attentive, more affectionate, as if he were making up for something. He helped me with chores, went with his father to the shop, brought me tea when he saw me sad. I thought it was his way of dealing with the pain, of filling the void Michael had left. How naive I was. What he was really doing was building a perfect mask to hide the monster inside. The years passed, and the wound never completely healed, but we learned to live with it. Julian married Lauren, a sweet girl from the next town over, and they seemed happy. They had 2 beautiful children, and I finally felt like life was giving us a second chance at happiness. Lauren called me Mom and helped me with the housework when they came to visit. Julian had inherited his father's talent for carpentry and had his own business. Everything seemed perfect again. But now, lying at the bottom of this chasm with broken ribs and the metallic taste of blood in my mouth, I understand that all that happiness was a carefully constructed lie. The first signs that something was wrong began 6 months ago when Arthur and I decided to update our will. We had saved our entire working lives, and between the house, the land I inherited from my parents, and our bank savings, we had about $200,000 to leave to our children and grandchildren. It was Julian who suggested we visit the lawyer. "Mom, Dad, you're 60 years old now. It's important to have everything in order," he told us with that smile that now seems sinister to me. Lauren nodded beside him, stroking my hand with the same fingers that would later push me to my death. "We love you both very much and want to make sure you're protected," she added in a sweet voice. How stupid I was to interpret those words as genuine love. The lawyer, an older man named Robert, whom we'd known for years, explained the options. We could leave everything in a trust, divide the inheritance among Julian's children, or simply make a traditional will. Julian insisted that we name him and Lauren as our sole heirs, arguing they would take care of distributing everything fairly among the grandchildren. "Besides," he said, "you're going to need us when you're older. It's better if we have access to the resources to take care of you properly." Something in his tone made me uncomfortable, but Arthur seemed convinced. My husband, who had always been more trusting than I, accepted the proposal without much resistance. I had my doubts, especially because I remembered how Michael had always talked about helping us financially when we were older. My eldest son had plans, dreams of taking care of us when the time came. But Michael was gone, and Julian was our only surviving son. We signed the papers on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember Lauren was wearing a beautiful green dress, and she hugged me tightly after the signing. "Now we're officially one big happy family, forever," she whispered in my ear. Her words gave me chills then, though I didn't understand why. Julian shook his father's hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. That night, as I prepared dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake. The following weeks were strange. Julian and Lauren began to visit more often, but their visits had a different feel. They no longer came just to spend family time. They always had suggestions about how to improve the house, about investments we should make, about life insurance policies we should take out. "Mom, you should think about selling this big house and moving into something smaller," Lauren would say as she examined our furniture with calculating eyes. "We could help you find a comfortable apartment in town." But I loved our house. Every corner held a memory. Every room told a story of our 40 years of marriage. The kitchen where I had prepared thousands of meals for my family, the workshop where Arthur created his masterpieces, the yard where our children and grandchildren had played. I couldn't imagine my life anywhere else. When I told them this, I saw a flash of irritation in Julian's eyes that chilled me to the bone. "Mom, you're being irrational," he told me in a tone he had never used with me before. "This house is too big for 2 people your age. If you fall down the stairs or something happens, we won't be able to help you in time." Lauren nodded vigorously, adding, "Besides, the upkeep must cost a fortune. It would be much smarter to sell now while the real estate market is high and move into something more appropriate for your age." Arthur began to consider their arguments. My husband, who had always been practical, started talking about the logic behind their suggestions. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind all this pressure. One night, after another of these tense conversations, I asked Arthur if he didn't find it strange that Julian was suddenly so interested in our financial affairs. "Carol, he's just worried about us," he replied while brushing his teeth. "Maybe we should consider their suggestions. We're not as young as we used to be." But I saw something in my husband's eyes, a shadow of doubt he didn't want to acknowledge. Now I know that Arthur already had suspicions, that he had already started connecting dots that I didn't even know existed. Things escalated when Julian suggested we should give him power of attorney over our finances. "It's just a precaution," he explained while Lauren made tea in our kitchen, as if she owned the place. "If one of you gets sick or has a health problem, we'll be able to handle your affairs without legal complications." The way he said it, so natural, so logical, almost convinced me. But there was something in his insistence that made me nervous. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Arthur's breathing beside me, trying to understand why I felt so uneasy. The next day, I decided to call my sister Barbara for advice. Barbara had always been sharper than me, more distrustful of people's intentions. When I told her about Julian's pressure, she was quiet for a long moment. "Carol, isn't it strange that Julian is so eager to control your money? I mean, he has his own business. He's doing well financially. Why would he need so much control over your finances?" Her words hit me like a slap in the face. She was right. Julian had never shown financial problems. He had never borrowed money. He had never given any sign of needing our financial help. That afternoon, when Julian arrived for another of his talks about our future, I decided to confront him directly. "Son," I said as we sat in the living room, "why is it so important for you to have control over our financial affairs? Arthur and I are still in full command of our faculties." His reaction was immediate and revealing. His face hardened, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes that reminded me of someone else. Something cold, calculating, dangerous. "Mom, it's not about control," he replied in a tense voice. "It's about love, about care, about family responsibility." But the way he said family responsibility sounded more like a threat than an expression of affection. Lauren, who had been quiet until then, intervened with her sweet but firm voice. "Carol, we just want what's best for you. It's painful to see you worrying about things we could easily handle." That night, after they left, Arthur and I had our first serious argument in years. He thought I was being paranoid, that I was looking for trouble where there was none. I insisted that something wasn't right, that our son's behavior had changed too much. "Arthur," I said as we washed the dishes, "don't you remember what Julian was like before Michael died? He was different, more distant, more. I don't know how to explain it, but there was something about him that scared me." My husband stopped washing the plate in his hands and stared at me. In his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Recognition. "Carol," he said in a very low voice, "there are things about Michael's death I never told you." My heart started beating so fast, I thought it would burst out of my chest. Arthur's words hit me like lightning. "What things about Michael's death?" I asked, my voice trembling. My husband sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, at the same table where we had shared thousands of family meals, where Michael used to do his homework and where Julian always remained silent. Arthur ran his hands over his face, as if trying to erase memories that had haunted him for 25 years. "The night Michael died," he began, his voice cracking. "Julian wasn't in his room studying like he told us. I saw him leave the house around 8 o'clock at night. I followed him because something about his attitude worried me. He'd been very strange those days, more aggressive, more resentful." My husband paused, looking at his hands as if the terrible truth he had kept for so long was written on them. I saw them arguing by the ravine. "Carol," I heard them yelling horrible things at each other. My world began to spin. "What were they arguing about?" I whispered, though a part of me no longer wanted to know the answer. Arthur looked up and I saw tears in his eyes. Tears he hadn't shed even at our eldest son's funeral. "About the inheritance." "Carol." Julian was furious because Michael was the older brother, because according to family traditions, he would inherit the larger share of our assets. But there was something else. Something about money Michael had found. "What money?" I asked, feeling the floor disappear from under my feet. Arthur sighed deeply before continuing. 3 days before he died, Michael came to talk to me in the shop. He had discovered that Julian had been stealing money from the family savings account. Small amounts at first, but then larger sums. Michael had proof. He had been investigating for months. My mind refused to process what I was hearing. My younger son, the one who had been so attentive after Michael's death, the one who helped us and cared for us, had been stealing from us even before his brother died. "Why did you never tell me anything?" I reproached Arthur, feeling the betrayal multiply twofold. "Because when I got to the ravine that night, it was already too late," he answered with a choked voice. I saw Julian standing over Michael's body. Our younger son was trembling, crying, repeating over and over, "It was an accident, it was an accident." He looked at me with those desperate eyes and begged me to help him. "Dad," he told me, "Michael slipped when he tried to hit me. I was just defending myself, and he lost his balance." Period. Tears streamed down my cheeks uncontrollably. "But you believed him," I murmured, though I already knew the answer. Arthur nodded slowly, with an expression of guilt that had gnawed at him for decades. He was my son, Carol. My younger son was asking for my help, and Michael was already dead. I couldn't bring one back to life by destroying the others. I thought it had really been an accident, that Julian had learned his lesson, that he would become a better man after this. "And the stolen money?" I asked, needing to know every detail of this nightmare. Julian promised me he would pay it back little by little, that he had taken the money to invest in a business that had gone bad. He swore he would never do something like that again. And I believed him, Carol. God forgive me. But I believed him because I needed to believe my son wasn't a murderer. I got up from the table, stumbling, leaning against the wall to keep from falling. Everything I had believed about my family, about my surviving son, about the last 25 years of my life, was a lie. "Did he pay back the money?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the look on Arthur's face. "Never," he replied. "In fact, he kept stealing. Small amounts that I pretended not to notice, because confronting him would mean admitting I had covered up a murder. I became his accomplice, Carol. Every time I stayed silent, every time I pretended not to see the bank accounts shrinking, I became more of his accomplice. The horrible reality began to take shape in my mind. That's why he's so interested in controlling our finances now," I murmured. "It's not because he cares about us. It's because he wants to finish what he started 25 years ago." Arthur nodded gravely. "And there's something else, Carol. Something I discovered just a few weeks ago." "What else could there be?" I asked, feeling that my heart couldn't take any more revelations. Arthur went to his desk and pulled out some papers he had been hiding under other documents. "I've been discreetly investigating Julian's finances. His woodworking business isn't doing as well as he makes us believe. In fact, he's on the verge of bankruptcy. He owes over $100,000 to various banks and suppliers." The papers trembled in my hands as I read the figures. Julian wasn't the successful man he pretended to be. He was a desperate failure who had been living on lies and stolen money for decades. "Lauren knows all this?" I asked, remembering her sweet smile and affectionate hugs. "I'm sure she does," Arthur replied. "I've noticed how she steers the conversations when they talk about our money. How she asks specific questions about our savings, about the value of the house, about our life insurance. They're not innocent questions, Carol. They're the questions of someone who is calculating exactly how much our death is worth." That sentence froze my blood. "Our death," I repeated in a whisper. It was the first time I had considered that Julian might want to harm us physically. Until that moment, I thought he just wanted to rob or scam us. But if he had killed his own brother for money, what would stop him from killing his parents for the same reason? "Arthur," I said, grabbing his hands, "we have to go to the police. We have to tell them the truth about Michael and about what's happening now." But my husband shook his head, with a look of hopelessness that broke my heart. "With what proof, Carol? I'm an accomplice in covering up a murder. If I speak now, I'll go to jail too. And besides, who's going to believe a 65-year-old man who's been keeping this secret for 25 years? He was right, and that made me desperate. We were trapped in a web of lies and complicity that we had helped weave ourselves. "So what do we do?" I asked, feeling panic begin to take hold of me. "Wait for him to kill us like he killed Michael. We're going to be very careful," Arthur told me, trying to sound more confident than he really was. "We're going to find a way to protect ourselves, to gather evidence, to—" But his words were cut short by the sound of the phone. It was Julian. "Hi, Mom," he said in that sweet voice that now sounded sinister to me. "Lauren and I were thinking, and we believe it would be beautiful to celebrate your 40th wedding anniversary with something special. What do you think if next weekend we take you to see those mountains you've always talked about? We could go on a family hike, take pictures, spend a perfect day together." My blood turned to ice. I looked at Arthur, who had heard the conversation and had the same look of terror on his face. "That's a very nice idea, son," I managed to reply in a trembling voice, "but let us think about it and we'll let you know tomorrow." After hanging up, Arthur and I stared at each other in silence, knowing we had just received an invitation to our own execution. "The mountains," I murmured. "He's going to take us to the mountains to kill us and make it look like an accident." Arthur nodded gravely, just like he did with Michael at the ravine. That night we didn't sleep a minute, holding each other in our bed, planning how we could save ourselves from our own son. The next few days were a nightmare of terror and pretense. Arthur and I had to act as if nothing had happened when Julian and Lauren came to visit, smile when they talked about the trip to the mountains, nod when they told us how excited they were to spend time as a family. But inside, every fiber of my being was screaming in fear. I knew I was looking into the eyes of my eldest son's murderers, and that they were now planning to do the same to me and my husband. Lauren arrived on Wednesday afternoon with a shopping bag and that radiant smile that now looked like a demon's grimace. "Carol, dear," she said, hugging me with the arms that would soon push me to my death, "I bought supplies for our mountain adventure. Crackers, water, fruit, everything we'll need for the picnic." She showed me the contents of the bag as if she were an excited child, but I could only think about how each of those items could be used to cover up our murder. "I also brought my new camera," she added, pulling out an expensive digital camera. "I want to capture every moment of this special day. They're going to be photographs we'll treasure forever." The irony of her words made me sick. The only photographs she would take would be of our shattered corpses at the bottom of some cliff, if anyone ever found our bodies. Julian appeared behind her, carrying a hiking backpack that looked brand new. "Dad," he said to Arthur with feigned enthusiasm, "I bought all the necessary gear for a safe hike. Ropes, harnesses, flashlights, a first aid kit." Every word that came out of his mouth sounded like a cruel joke. Safety equipment to plan our murders. The perversity of the situation made me dizzy. "Isn't it a bit dangerous for people our age?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I looked for any excuse to cancel the trip. Lauren caressed my cheek with that fake tenderness that turned my stomach. "That's why we chose a very easy and safe trail," she assured me. "It's a walk even children can do. Besides, Julian and I will be there to take care of you every step of the way." Yes, they would be there to take care of us. Right up to the exact moment they decided to push us off a cliff. That night, when they finally left, Arthur and I sat in our living room, trembling not just from the cold but from the absolute terror we had been holding in for hours. "We can't go," I said, grabbing his hands. "We just can't go. We'll make up any excuse." "If we don't go," Arthur replied in a grave voice, "they'll find another way to kill us. Maybe something that looks even more accidental, like a house fire or a robbery gone wrong. At least in the mountains, we know what they're going to try to do." His words had a terrible logic, but they didn't console me at all. "So what do you suggest?" I asked, desperate to find some solution that would save our lives. Arthur was thoughtful for a few minutes before answering. "We're going to go, but we're going to be prepared. I'm going to take my cell phone hidden, set to record everything that happens. If we manage to survive, we'll have evidence. And if not," his voice broke, "at least someone will know the truth." On Friday night, we could barely touch our dinner. We knew it might be our last meal together in our home, in the kitchen where we had shared so many happy moments when we were a real family. Arthur reviewed his will one more time, making sure that if something happened to us, at least Julian wouldn't get everything without some record of our suspicions. "I wrote a letter," he confessed, pulling a sealed envelope from his desk. "It's addressed to your sister, Barbara. In it, I explained everything we know about Michael's death and what we believe Julian plans to do to us. I hid it where we keep the important documents. If we don't come back from this trip, at least she'll know where to look for the truth." That night we lay in bed holding each other, whispering words of love that could be our last. "If anything happens to me," Arthur told me, "I want you to know that these 40 years with you have been the best of my life. Despite everything, despite the mistakes and the secrets, I love you more than my own life." I cried in silence, memorizing the rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body, the scent of his skin. Saturday dawned with a clear sky that seemed to mock our situation. Julian arrived early, whistling a cheerful tune that chilled my blood. "Good morning, lovebirds," he shouted from the front door. "Ready for your big adventure?" Lauren appeared behind him, radiant as a bride on her wedding day, except this was a wedding with death. During breakfast, which we could barely touch, Julian explained the route we would follow in detail. "It's a beautiful trail," he said, spreading a map on the table. "It leads to a lookout point where you can see the whole valley. They say the views are spectacular." His eyes shone with an enthusiasm that seemed demonic to me. Of course the views would be spectacular. They would be the last we would ever see. "The trail has some slightly steep parts," Lauren added, as if giving us useful tourist information, "but nothing that experts like you can't handle." Her comment about our supposed hiking skills sounded like a cruel joke. We were two 60-year-olds who barely walked in the park once in a while. As we loaded the car, I could see Julian meticulously checking his backpack, making sure he had everything necessary for his plan. I saw ropes, a small shovel, and something that looked like a flare gun. "What's that for?" I asked, pointing to the gun. "For safety," he replied without flinching. "If we get lost or something goes wrong, we can send a distress signal." Of course, they would send a distress signal after pushing us off a cliff so our bodies could be found and it could be confirmed that it was a tragic accident during a family hike. Everything was calculated. Every detail had been planned to make our murders look perfectly natural. The car ride to the mountains took 2 hours that felt like an eternity. Lauren played cheerful music on the radio and sang along with the songs, as if we were really going on a fun family outing. Julian drove carefully, obeying all the speed limits, stopping at every stop sign. He didn't want to risk an accident that would ruin his perfect plans. During the drive, Arthur discreetly took my hand and activated the recording on his phone. Everything that happened from that moment on would be recorded. If we managed to survive, we would have proof. If not, at least the truth wouldn't die with us. When we finally arrived at the trailhead, my heart was beating so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. The place was beautiful, with tall trees and the sound of a nearby river, but for me, it had become the stage for my own execution. Julian and Lauren took the backpacks out of the car, smiling and joking as if it were the happiest day of their lives. "Ready for the adventure?" Julian asked, and for the first time in 25 years, I saw in his eyes the same cold glint he'd had the night he killed his brother. The trail started out relatively easy, winding through leafy trees and moss-covered rocks. Lauren walked ahead of us, constantly taking pictures and commenting on the beauty of the landscape. "Look at those wildflowers," she'd exclaim, pointing to bushes full of yellow flowers and that beautiful bird. Her performance was perfect, that of a loving daughter-in-law enjoying a special day with her in-laws. Julian walked behind us, supposedly to make sure we didn't fall behind, but I could feel his eyes on our backs like daggers. Every time I turned to look at him, he smiled at me, with that smile he had perfected over 25 years of lies. "How are you doing, Mom and Dad?" he would ask with false concern. "Do you need to stop for a rest?" After an hour of hiking, we began to climb a steeper part of the trail. My legs already felt heavy, and Arthur was breathing with difficulty. We weren't used to this kind of exercise, and our murderous children knew it perfectly well. They had chosen a route that would exhaust us physically, that would make us vulnerable when the time came to execute their plan. "We're almost at the overlook," Lauren announced, although according to the map I had seen at home, we still had at least another hour of hiking. Her lie confirmed to me that they had no intention of reaching the real overlook. The place where they planned to kill us had to be much closer. During the hike, I tried to memorize every detail of the trail, every tree, every rock that could serve as a reference if I managed to survive and needed to explain to the police exactly where it had all happened. Arthur was doing the same, and we occasionally exchanged looks filled with terror and determination. We knew we were walking toward our death, but we also knew it was our only chance to get evidence against our killers. "Oh, look at that," Lauren suddenly shouted, pointing to a rock formation that rose to our right. "That cliff has an incredible view. Why don't we climb up there to take some special pictures?" My blood ran cold. There it was, the place they had chosen for our murder. The cliff rose about 100 feet above the main trail, accessible by a side path that looked much more dangerous than the one we had been following. The rocks were loose. There were fewer trees to grab onto in case of a slip, and from the top, you could see a precipice that dropped into a deep ravine full of sharp rocks. "I don't know if that's a good idea," I said, trying to sound casual. "That path looks pretty dangerous for people our age." But Julian had already started walking toward the turnoff, carrying his backpack full of safety gear that he knew he wouldn't use to save us. "Come on, Mom," he told me in the voice he used as a child when he wanted to convince me of something. "It'll only be a few minutes. Besides, Lauren's right. The pictures from up there are going to be spectacular." The way he said spectacular made me tremble. They would be spectacular for whoever saw them later as evidence of our accident. Arthur squeezed my hand discreetly, reminding me that his phone was recording everything. We had to keep going. We had to see it through to the end to get the evidence we needed. If we refused now, they would simply find another opportunity, another place, another excuse to kill us. The climb up to the cliff was exhausting. The loose rock slid under our feet, and more than once I was about to fall. But the most terrifying thing was realizing how perfect this place was for a murder. If someone accidentally slipped and fell from the top, there would be no way to survive. And most importantly, there would be no witnesses. "We're almost there," shouted Lauren from above, where she had already arrived with the agility of someone who had planned this route carefully. Julian followed her, and then helped Arthur and me complete the last few feet of the climb. His hands on my arms felt like the talons of a vulture. The overlook was, indeed, spectacular. From there you could see the whole valley, the mountains in the distance, and the river winding through the trees. In any other circumstance, it would have been a beautiful moment to share with family. But knowing what I knew, the place seemed like the perfect setting for a nightmare. "Come over here for the pictures," shouted Lauren, positioning herself near the edge of the cliff. "I want the valley in the background." Arthur and I approached slowly, each step bringing us closer to our final destination. I could see Julian strategically positioning himself behind us, calculating angles, measuring distances. "Perfect," Lauren exclaimed, raising her camera. "Now hug each other and smile." Arthur and I hugged, probably for the last time, while she took picture after picture. Each flash of the camera seemed like a lightning bolt heralding the storm to come. "Take one more," Julian suggested, moving closer to us. "But this time, stand a little further back, so the landscape shows up better." One more step back meant being exactly on the edge of the precipice. Arthur and I exchanged a look. The time had come. We moved back as they had asked, feeling the solid ground disappear beneath our feet, with only the empty chasm behind us. Lauren raised the camera one more time, but this time I saw something different in her eyes. There was no longer any need to pretend. The mask had fallen. "Smile," she said in a voice that was no longer sweet. "This is going to be your last picture." At that moment, Julian lunged toward us with his arms outstretched. The plan was simple: push us backward so we would fall into the void, take some pictures of the accident, and then go down to discover our shattered bodies. But Arthur had been preparing for this moment. At the last second, he managed to grab Julian's wrist and pull him forward. "If we're going to die, you're coming with us," he shouted with a fury I had never seen in him. For a moment, the four of us were teetering on the edge of the cliff, grabbing onto each other in a macabre dance between life and death. Lauren was screaming and trying to help Julian, but the weight of all of us was too much. I felt the ground give way beneath my feet, gravity begin to win the battle. And then we fell. The four of us together, locked in a deadly embrace, screaming as the air whistled around us and the rocky ground rushed up at a dizzying speed. In those seconds that lasted an eternity, I thought of Michael, of how he must have felt when Julian pushed him into the ravine 25 years ago. The impact was brutal. I heard the horrible sound of bones breaking, of my own body shattering against the rocks. The pain was indescribable. But even more terrible was the taste of blood in my mouth and the certainty that this time Julian had won. This time there would be no witnesses to tell the truth. But then I heard Arthur's voice, faint but clear. "Carol, don't move. Play dead." And I realized something incredible. I was still alive. The pain was so intense I thought I would go mad. Every fiber of my body screamed in agony. I felt blood running down my face and something wet and sticky soaking my clothes. But Arthur's voice echoed in my ears like a divine command. Play dead. With a willpower I didn't know I possessed, I remained completely still, controlling even my breathing to make it imperceptible. A few feet away, I could hear the pained groans of Julian and Lauren. They had also survived the fall, but from their moans, they seemed to be in worse shape than we were. Lauren? I heard my son's broken voice. Are you okay? His concern for his wife turned my stomach. This man who had murdered his own brother and tried to kill us was still capable of feeling love for someone. I think I broke my leg, Lauren groaned. It hurts so much, Julian. And the old folks? The dismissive way she referred to us confirmed what I already knew. We had never been family to her. We were just obstacles on her path to our money. I heard movement, as if Julian were crawling toward us. My heart was beating so fast I feared he could hear it. They're dead, he announced after a few minutes that felt like hours. Both of them. Their eyes are open, but they're not breathing. His lie filled me with a strange hope. If he believed we were dead, maybe we would have a chance. Perfect, Lauren whispered, with a satisfaction that chilled my blood. It worked just as we planned. Well, except for the part about us falling, too. I heard her bitter laugh. At least we won't have to pretend we loved them anymore. For the next few minutes, which felt like an eternity, Julian and Lauren discussed their situation. They were both injured, but they could move. The plan now was to crawl until they found a place where they could call for help, and then tell the story of how they had miraculously survived a tragic accident that had killed the poor old folks. Remember the story, Julian told Lauren. We were taking pictures when a rock came loose under Dad's feet. He tripped and, trying to grab on, pulled Mom down with him. We tried to help them, but we fell too. It's important that our stories match. I know, Lauren replied. We've practiced this hundreds of times. We are the traumatized survivors of a family tragedy. Poor us, we lost our beloved in-laws in a horrible accident. Her performance was so convincing that if I hadn't lived the truth, I would have believed every word. Gradually, their voices faded as they crawled toward what they hoped would be their salvation. When silence finally fell, Arthur whispered my name so low I could barely hear it. Carol, are you okay? I answered in the same whisper, confirming that I was alive but terribly injured. My left leg is broken, he said. His voice choked with pain, and I think I have some fractured ribs. And you? I did a mental inventory of my body. I felt a stabbing pain in my right arm. My head throbbed as if someone were hitting it with a hammer, and there was definitely something wrong with my shoulder. But I was alive, and that was more than I could have hoped for. We're in bad shape, but we're alive, I whispered. Your phone, did it survive? Arthur carefully fumbled in his pockets, trying not to make a sound. It's here, but the screen is cracked. I don't know if it works. After a few minutes of careful handling, he managed to turn it on. It works, but there's no signal down here. That was the most terrifying part of our situation. We were alive, but trapped at the bottom of a ravine, injured, and with no way to communicate with the outside world. If no one came looking for us, we would die here slowly, from thirst, from hunger, or from our injuries. Arthur, I whispered, before it's too late, I need you to tell me everything. Everything that really happened the night Michael died. My husband sighed deeply, as if he had been waiting for this moment for 25 years. That night, he began in a trembling voice. Michael came to find me in the shop. He was furious, holding papers in his hands, bank statements. He showed me evidence that Julian had been stealing money from our accounts for months. Small amounts at first, then larger sums. Michael had been investigating because he'd noticed discrepancies in our savings. The physical pain mixed with the emotional pain as I listened to the truth that had been hidden for decades. Michael wanted to confront Julian that very night, Arthur continued. I tried to calm him down, to convince him to wait until the next day, but he was determined. He said he couldn't sleep knowing his younger brother was stealing from us. And you followed him? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I followed him because I was afraid of what might happen. I knew Michael's temper when he got angry, and I also knew, well, I had noticed something strange about Julian lately, a coldness that gave me the chills. When I got to the ravine, Arthur continued, I found them yelling at each other. Michael had the papers in his hand, waving them in Julian's face. You're a thief, he was yelling. You're stealing from our own parents. Julian was denying everything, saying Michael was crazy, that he was making things up. My heart raced as I imagined the scene. My two sons, facing off in the darkness, one accusing the other of betrayal. What happened next? Arthur took a long pause before continuing. Michael told him that if he didn't return the money and confess everything to us, he would tell us the truth himself. Julian became furious. He yelled that Michael had always been the favorite, that he'd always had it easy, that it was time for things to change. And then, Arthur's voice broke. Julian pushed Michael. It wasn't an accident, Carol. He pushed him with all his strength, deliberately. I saw Michael try to keep his balance, his arms flailing desperately for something to hold on to. But it was too late. Tears streamed down my cheeks, mixing with the blood from my wounds. Why did you never tell me the truth? Arthur sighed deeply. Because when I got to where Julian was, he was crying, shaking, telling me over and over that it was an accident, that he hadn't meant to do it. He begged me not to tell you anything, that he couldn't lose you too. But you knew it was a lie? I murmured. Deep in my heart, yes. But he was my son, Carol, my only surviving son. How could I turn him over to the police? How could I destroy what was left of our family? His justification hurt as much as my physical injuries. And the stolen money, he continued. Julian promised he would pay it back little by little. He swore it had been a bad decision, that he had been desperate, that it would never happen again, but he never paid back a single penny. In fact, he kept stealing, and I kept quiet because every day that passed made me more of an accomplice to his crime. At that moment, we heard voices in the distance. Julian and Lauren had managed to find help. Soon, the rescue teams would be here, and our murderous children would play the role of their lives, the traumatized survivors of a family tragedy. The voices grew closer, accompanied by the sound of helicopters overhead. The rescue team had arrived, and with them came the most crucial moment of our lives. Arthur and I had to make a decision in minutes. Did we continue to play dead until we found the perfect opportunity to reveal the truth, or did we risk being rescued alongside our murderers? Carol, Arthur whispered urgently. The phone recorded everything that happened up there. We have Lauren's confession about the plan. We have Julian admitting we were obstacles. We have everything. But if they find us alive now, they could destroy the evidence before we can get it to the authorities. He was right. If Julian and Lauren realized we had survived and heard their confessions, they would find a way to silence us forever. This time it wouldn't be an accident. It would be something much more direct and final. We had to wait for the perfect moment. They're down here, Julian's voice shouted from above. My parents, please, hurry. His performance was perfect, his voice broken with grief and desperation. If I didn't know the truth, I would have believed he was a son devastated by the loss of his parents. Sir, stay calm, replied an authoritative voice that must have belonged to the rescue team leader. We're coming down to assess them. Can you and your wife move? I heard the sound of ropes and equipment being prepared for the descent. Lauren had perfected her role as a grieving daughter-in-law. I can't believe this happened, she sobbed. We were just taking pictures, so happy. It all happened so fast. A rock came loose and they fell. Every word was a stab in my heart, because I knew she would repeat those same words to the police, to the media, to anyone who would listen to her version of events. The rescuers began to descend. I could hear their voices getting closer, the sound of their boots against the rock, the clinking of their gear. Arthur squeezed my hand discreetly, reminding me we had to keep up the act no matter what happened. Here they are, shouted one of the rescuers upon finding us. We've got 2 individuals at the bottom of the ravine. He approached us and began to examine us. I kept my eyes closed and my breathing so faint it was almost imperceptible. I felt his hands searching for a pulse on my neck, his ear close to my mouth, trying to detect breath. This one still has a weak pulse, he announced, referring to Arthur. The woman, I'm not sure. I need the medical team down here immediately. My heart raced. The plan was working. They would believe Arthur was on the verge of death but still alive, while I would be close enough to death not to be an immediate threat. For the next few minutes, which felt like hours, the paramedics worked on us. I felt them place an oxygen mask on me, check my wounds, strap me to a stretcher. The entire time I had to fight every instinct in my body that screamed at me to open my eyes, to ask for help, to stop pretending. The man is stable but critical, I heard one of the paramedics report over the radio. The woman is in very serious condition, pulse nearly undetectable. We need to transport them to the hospital immediately. Perfect. They would take us to the hospital, where we would have the chance to speak to the authorities without Julian and Lauren being able to silence us. During the ascent on the stretchers, I could hear Lauren's fake sobs and the words of comfort the rescuers offered her and Julian. "You were very brave to survive this," someone was telling them. "It's a miracle you're relatively okay." If only they knew that the real miracle was that Arthur and I were alive to tell the truth. In the medical helicopter, as we flew toward the hospital, I could feel Arthur's presence on the stretcher next to mine. The paramedics were focused on keeping him stable, and from their conversations, I understood that he really was in critical condition. His injuries were more severe than mine, and for a terrifying moment, I feared he might die before we had the chance to reveal the truth. "Ma'am," I heard one of the paramedics say to me, "if you can hear me, hang on. We'll be at the hospital in a few minutes." His voice was gentle, full of a genuine compassion that contrasted dramatically with the falsehoods I had been hearing from my own family. When we arrived at the hospital, the chaos was immediate. Doctors and nurses were running back and forth, shouting medical orders I didn't understand. They took me directly to an emergency room, where they began to work on my injuries. I had to keep feigning unconsciousness, but I also had to find a way to communicate with someone I could trust. "Doctor," I heard a nurse say, "her vital signs are strange. Her pulse is stronger than we'd expect for someone in her supposed state." My heart skipped a beat. Had they found me out? Was I such a bad actress that my own body was betraying me? The doctor murmured. "It sometimes happens in cases of extreme trauma. The body has mysterious ways of holding on to life. Let's keep a close eye on her." His explanation saved me, but it also made me realize how precarious my situation was. I couldn't keep up this act forever. Hours later, when the hospital had quieted down a bit, I heard familiar voices in the hallway. Julian and Lauren had arrived to play their roles as devastated relatives. "How are they?" Julian asked in a broken voice. "Are they going to survive?" The irony of his words made me sick. He was hoping the answer would be no. "The gentleman is stable but still critical," I heard a doctor respond. "The lady, well, the next few hours will be crucial. We've done everything we can." Lauren made a sound that was supposed to be a sob of grief, but to me, it sounded like a sigh of relief. "Can we see them?" Julian asked. "Just for a few minutes. We need to say goodbye, just in case." The doctor agreed, and soon I heard footsteps approaching my bed. This was the most dangerous moment of all. I had to convince my murderous son that I was really dying. I felt Julian's presence beside my bed. His hand touched mine, and it was all I could do not to snatch my hand away immediately. "Mom," he whispered, "if you can hear me, I want you to know that I love you. I'm so sorry this happened." His words were poisoned honey, sweet on the surface, but deadly in their essence. Lauren approached from the other side. "Carol, dear," she murmured, "you've been like a mother to me. We'll never forget you." Liar. The only reason they wouldn't forget me was because they would have to live with the knowledge of having murdered me. But then, Julian leaned closer to my ear and whispered something that froze my blood. "I hope you learned your lesson, Mom. You never should have asked so many questions about our finances. Some truths are better left buried. Like Michael." At that moment, I knew our plan had worked. Julian had just confessed, and although I had no way to record it, there was a nurse in the room who had heard every word. Julian's whisper echoed in my ears like a direct confession of his guilt. He had mentioned Michael, admitted that some truths should remain buried, and most importantly, acknowledged that our questions about finances were the reason for our accident. But I needed more than that. I needed a full confession that couldn't be misinterpreted or denied later. The nurse who had heard the comment, a young woman named Casey, according to her name tag, had frozen next to the monitoring machine. Through my half-closed eyelids, I saw her eyes widen in shock and horror. She had heard something she shouldn't have, and her expression told me she understood the implications of those words perfectly. "What did you say about Michael?" Lauren whispered, clearly surprised by the mention of the dead brother. Julian tensed, realizing he had said too much. "Nothing," he muttered. "Just that. Well, Mom always wondered what really happened that night. I guess it doesn't matter now." But it did matter, and Lauren was smart enough to realize her husband had made a mistake. "Julian," she said in a tense voice. "Let's go. The doctors need space to work." I could feel the tension between them, the mutual understanding that they had said too much in the wrong place. After they left, Nurse Casey approached my bed. "Ma'am," she whispered so low I could barely hear her. "I know you can hear me. What I just heard, it's not right. If you're in danger, you need to let me know somehow." Her voice had an urgency that filled me with hope. Someone else had started to suspect. Very slowly, almost imperceptibly, I moved my index finger. It was the smallest possible movement, but Casey noticed it immediately. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You're pretending to be unconscious." I moved my finger again, twice this time. "Okay, listen," she said, leaning even closer. "I'm going to pretend I'm checking your monitors. If you are in danger from those people who were just here, move your finger 3 times. Without hesitation, I moved my finger 3 times. Casey stifled a gasp. "They did this to you?" 3 more movements. The nurse moved away from my bed and pretended to check my IV drip while she processed what she had just discovered. I could see in her expression that she was struggling with what to do. Finally, she came closer again. "I'm going to talk to the doctor in charge," she whispered. "But I need you to keep pretending until we can protect you. Do you understand?" I moved my finger once. The next few minutes were agonizing. Casey left the room, and I was left alone, waiting and praying that she would believe my story and take the right action. Finally, I heard footsteps approaching. It was Casey, accompanied by an older man who must have been the head doctor and, surprisingly, 2 police officers. "Ma'am," the doctor said in a low voice, "Nurse Casey told me about your situation. If you can hear me, we need you to know that you are safe now. The officers are here to protect you." I felt a wave of relief so intense, I almost broke my act. "Can you open your eyes?" one of the officers asked. Slowly, very slowly, I opened my eyes. The hospital light blinded me for a moment, but gradually I could focus on the worried faces surrounding me. "Thank God," Casey murmured. "I thought I was going crazy." "Ma'am," said the police officer, a middle-aged man with a serious expression, "I'm Detective James Morales. We understand you may be in a very dangerous situation. Can you tell us what really happened on that mountain?" My voice came out as a rough whisper after hours of feigning unconsciousness. My son and his wife. They pushed us." The next few hours were a whirlwind of statements, recordings, and revelations. I told Detective Morales everything I knew. Michael's death, Julian's thefts, the pressure to change our will, and finally, the plan to murder us on the mountain. But the most important thing was the recording on Arthur's phone. "Your husband has recorded evidence?" the detective asked, his eyes bright. "Yes," I replied. "It's all on his phone, the confessions, the plans, everything." The detective went immediately to the room where Arthur was being treated. Arthur had regained consciousness an hour after I did, and when the detective explained the situation, he handed over his phone without hesitation. "It's all here," he said in a weak but firm voice. 25 years of lies, and the truth about what happened today. While the police technicians analyzed the recording, Julian and Lauren were still in the waiting room, playing their roles as devastated relatives to other hospital visitors. They had no idea that their carefully crafted performance was about to end forever. "The recording is clear," the detective announced an hour later. "We have explicit confessions about the murder of Michael, admissions about the theft of money, and direct evidence of premeditated attempted murder against you both. It's more than enough to arrest them. But are you going to arrest them here?" I asked, worried for our safety. "If they realize we're alive and talking." The detective nodded, understanding my concern. "We already have officers in position. As soon as we have the arrest warrant signed, we'll take them into custody. In the meantime, you are under police protection." The irony of the situation was not lost on me. Julian and Lauren were down there, probably talking to other patients' families, receiving condolences for our deaths, planning how to handle our funeral and our inheritance. They had no idea that upstairs, in the hospital rooms, we were shattering their carefully constructed world of lies. "There's something else," the detective said, pulling out a folder of papers. "After hearing your story, we investigated your son's finances. Not only is he bankrupt, as you suspected, he also owes money to some very dangerous people, unofficial lenders who don't accept excuses." My blood ran cold. "You mean that you weren't just inconveniences for him," the detective confirmed. "You were his only salvation. With your inheritance, he could pay off his debts and start over. Without you, he would probably be dead in a few weeks." That revelation added a new dimension to the betrayal. He hadn't just seen us as obstacles. He had seen us as his financial lifeline. Our death wasn't just convenient for him. It was absolutely necessary for his survival. "And what will happen to our grandchildren?" Arthur asked, feeling a new wave of pain at the thought of Julian and Lauren's innocent children. "Social services will take care of them temporarily," the detective replied gently. "But as I understand it, you could apply for custody once you recover from your injuries." The idea of raising our own murderer's children was overwhelming, but it was also the only way to ensure something good came out of this nightmare. Those children were innocent, and they deserved a chance to grow up in a home where love was real, not fake. "It's time," the detective announced as another officer entered the room with papers in hand. "The warrants are signed. We're going to arrest them now." Through my hospital room window, which overlooked the parking lot, I could see several police cars positioning themselves discreetly. The moment I had been waiting for 25 years had finally arrived. Justice for Michael, justice for us, and an end to the lies that had poisoned our family for decades. The moment of the arrest was something I will never forget. From my hospital window, I could see the officers discreetly approach the waiting room where Julian and Lauren were still playing their roles as traumatized victims. Detective Morales had allowed me to listen to the operation on his radio, so I could follow every moment of what was about to happen. Julian Miller and Lauren Miller. I heard the firm voice of the officer in charge. "You are under arrest for the murder of Michael Miller and the attempted murder of Carol and Arthur Miller." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, Lauren's hysterical voice. "What are you talking about? We're the victims here. Our in-laws died in an accident." "Ma'am," the officer replied calmly, "your in-laws are alive and have provided complete evidence of your crimes." There was a moment of absolute silence, followed by a cry of despair from Julian. "That's impossible. We saw them die. They were dead." His unwitting confession was captured by the police recorders, adding another piece of evidence to their case. Over the radio, I heard Lauren start to blame Julian. "It was all his idea. I didn't want to do any of this. He forced me." And Julian, desperate, shouted, "You were the one who suggested the cliff. You planned this whole thing." In a matter of minutes, the alliance that had lasted for years crumbled as they each tried to save their own skin. Detective Morales returned to my room an hour later, with an expression of satisfaction mixed with sadness. "They're in custody and on their way to the station," he informed me. "They're both trying to blame each other, which only strengthens our case. But there's something else I need to tell you." "What else?" I asked, not sure my heart could take any more revelations. "During the arrest, we found this in your son's backpack," he said, showing me a small digital recorder. "Apparently, he had been recording his conversations with you and your husband for the past few weeks, probably looking for evidence that you suspected something." My blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" The detective sighed. "It means he knew you were starting to uncover the truth. The trip to the mountains wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was a direct response to your suspicions. In one of the recordings, Lauren is clearly heard telling him, 'We have to act fast before they go to the police, period.' The depth of their planning and the coldness of their calculation took my breath away. They hadn't just planned to kill us, they had been monitoring our conversations, assessing the level of danger we posed to them. We were mice in a maze, and they had been the scientists observing our every move. There's something else," the detective continued, "that we found in the investigation of his finances. Your son didn't just owe money to dangerous lenders. He had also forged your signature on several documents, trying to access your bank accounts. If you had died on that mountain, he would have had immediate access to all your resources. Each new revelation was like another stab. My own son had not only planned to murder me, he had been actively stealing from me, forging my signature, violating every principle of family trust I had tried to instill in him. How much money did he steal in total? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. About $50,000 over the last 5 years, the detective replied. Small amounts he thought you wouldn't notice, but which add up to a significant sum. $50,000. The money Arthur and I had saved over decades of hard work, penny by penny, had been funding our son's lavish lifestyle while he plotted our murder. The following days in the hospital were a whirlwind of police interviews, lawyer visits, and calls from media outlets that had picked up the story. The local press had dubbed the case the most horrific family betrayal of the decade, and reporters from all over the country wanted to hear our side of the story. My sister Barbara arrived from the next town over, crying and hugging me as if she hadn't seen me in decades. "Carol," she said over and over, "I always knew there was something off about Julian after Michael died, but I never imagined he was capable of this." Her words comforted me because they confirmed that my motherly instincts hadn't been completely blind. And the children? I asked about my grandchildren, who were now in the temporary custody of social services. "I saw them yesterday," Barbara replied sadly. "They're confused, asking why their parents can't come home. They're too young to understand what really happened." The lawyer we had hired, the same Robert who had prepared our will, came to see us with news about the legal process. "The case is solid," he assured us. "With the recordings, the confessions during the arrest, and all the financial evidence, it's almost impossible for them to escape significant convictions." But then he added something that chilled my blood. "However, they're trying to negotiate a lesser plea deal, claiming it was a crime of passion, not premeditated." "Crime of passion?" I exclaimed indignantly. "They planned this for weeks. They bought special equipment. They chose the perfect spot." Robert nodded gravely. "I know, and we have evidence of premeditation. But their lawyers are going to argue it was a desperate decision made under extreme financial pressure. The idea that they might receive reduced sentences for their crimes filled me with rage. They had murdered Michael, tried to murder us, stolen our money for years, and now they wanted to present themselves as victims of circumstance. "What can we do to ensure they get what they deserve?" I asked. "Testify," Robert replied simply. "Your testimony, combined with all the evidence, will be crucial for the jury to understand the true nature of these crimes. But I warn you, it will be emotionally devastating to face your son in court." He was right. The idea of looking Julian in the eye during the trial, of listening to his lawyers try to justify the unjustifiable, of publicly reliving every moment of this nightmare, was overwhelming. But it was what I had to do. For Michael, for us, and for my grandchildren who deserved to know the truth about their parents. 3 weeks after the arrest, Arthur and I were finally able to go home. Our wounds had healed enough to allow us to move, though he still needed crutches, and my arm was in a sling. The house felt strange, like the set of a play after all the actors have left. Everything was exactly as we had left it on the day of our family outing. The breakfast dishes were still in the sink. The bed was unmade. The flowers Julian had brought me that week were still on the kitchen table, now withered and dead. It was as if time had stopped the moment our normal life ended forever. "Do you think we can ever be happy again?" I asked Arthur that first night back, as we lay in our familiar bed. He hugged me with his good arm and sighed deeply. "I don't know, Carol, but we're alive, we have the truth on our side, and for the first time in 25 years, we don't have to live with secrets." The trial began 6 months later. The day I had to testify, I looked Julian directly in the eyes for the first time since the arrest. I saw no remorse, no pain, no sign of the son I had raised. I saw a cold, calculating stranger who had disguised himself as my son for decades. When I finished my testimony, after recounting every horrible detail of our experience, I addressed him directly from the witness stand. "Julian, I don't know who you are, but you are no longer my son. My son died the night you killed Michael, and what has been living in his place for 25 years is a monster that I unknowingly helped raise." The jury deliberated for 3 days before finding Julian guilty of first-degree murder for Michael's death and attempted first-degree murder for what he did to us. Lauren received the same conviction as an accomplice. Both were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, a year later, Arthur and I have begun the process of formally adopting our grandchildren. They are beautiful, Innocent children who deserve a chance to grow up knowing what true love is, not the manipulative, toxic love they received from their biological parents. Every night, when I put them to bed, I tell them about their Uncle Michael, the brother they never knew. I tell them about his kindness, his honesty, his dream of becoming an engineer. I want them to know there was goodness in their family, even if their parents chose the path of darkness.